Hinduism is the earliest, right, of the Indian religions and definitely creates all types of art to complement it. So I'm excited to show you some Hindu art, right, and how it lines up with the different gods and goddesses. Because the gods and goddesses I mentioned in Hinduism are very important. There's tons of them running around. And as I said before, there's no way I can talk to you about all of them. So what I did was really pick out what we consider the Trinity and talk to you about those. Now, first off, I'll talk to you a little bit about the idea of the Brahma, or the sense of what we call the One, from which all others come in Hinduism. Then we'll talk about what's called the Trinity, the Hindu Trinity. Vishnu, the creator, Shiva, the destroyer, and then Durga Devi, the mother goddess figure. We'll speak very briefly about the caste system, and then I would like to show you some temple architecture and some fun tantric images as well. So how is Hinduism sort of organized around the gods and goddesses? All the gods and goddesses are said to be part of the One, or what they call the Brahma, and that all the gods are a reflection of that oneness. So I almost think of it like a funhouse mirror, where you're looking at your image in a funhouse mirror, but then there's all these reflections, fading away from you and coming back. That's how I always think about the splintering of the gods and the goddesses off of the Brahma, or the One, in Hinduism. Now, when you talk to most Hindus, they say it's a polytheism. It is multiple gods. Poly, many, theism, theistic gods. Or worship, right? So it's a multi-godded system. But is it really just a very sophisticated monotheism if everything is part of the One? I'm not a Hindu, so how do you answer this question? But again, I put it out there because I think it's a very complex religion. A lot of people just kind of get dazzled by all these kind of fun gods and goddesses running around, but I think it's a very deep religion, where if you start asking these complicated questions, you're sort of left scratching your head and going, well, I don't really know. Is it a polytheism? Is it not a polytheism? But again, the One, or the Brahma, is sort of the central idea to them, and all the other gods kind of splinter off from that. And I always use that funhouse mirror analogy, and I also point to how the gods and goddesses are represented. You'll often notice that many of them have multiple arms, things of that nature. This idea of multiple jobs, multiple reflections, multiplicity in general, I think runs deep in Hinduism, where they don't believe that, to them, I don't think they believe that what you see right in front of your face is the only thing to see. I think that they see the world as layers of meaning, layers of imagery. How can you not feel this way when you know you've been reincarnated multiple times? How can the layers not sort of make sense to you, that you've been reincarnated, you've come back, you keep doing this over and over again? So again, I think that layering idea, or multiplicity idea, runs very deep in their cultural thinking. And again, the Brahma is the universal One, but we all have an Atman, or an individual soul. And so the goal for Hindus is to figure out how to overcome their Atman, or overcome their connection to their individuality in a sense, and how can they return back to the oneness, let's say. So for them, finding moksha, because that is their term for nirvana, by the way, for them to reach moksha is a sense of divorcing yourself from the individual you and becoming okay with going back to being part of the One. And if you think about it, most people have a lot of problems with erasing their individuality. Especially in Western culture, we're taught that our individuality is very important. That our sense of uniqueness, right, our sense of specialness, right, that's you want to be unique, you want to be special. And in Hinduism, in Buddhism, it's sort of touted that if you could erase your attachments, or erase your sense of having to be outside of like the universe in a sense, right? If you could become one with the energy of the universe, that's your goal. You're supposed to erase your oneness in a sense. But it's a struggle, and that's why reincarnation happens over and over and over for these individuals. That's what they believe, that the struggle is very hard, right? The struggle is real to reach moksha, or reach nirvana in the Buddhist system. So I just wanted you to think about that a little bit. So as I mentioned, I'm going to show you within Hinduism what we call the Trinity. Vishnu, Shiva, Durga Devi. Because again, with our limited time, I could not possibly show you all the gods and goddesses related to Hinduism. So Vishnu, right, he is the creator god. And it is said that he dreams the universe and we live in his dream. So I show you an image of him sort of laying down, taking a little snooze. And what Hindus believe is that as he dreams the universe, we live in his dream. And I'm a big sci-fi, fantasy reader, and watcher, and consumer. And, this is a very common idea that's posited in a lot of sci-fi universes is that, are we all just brains in a vat? The Matrix, right? Are we inside of somebody else's dream? Inception. So, this idea of again, Maya and illusion. Hindus were way out ahead of this idea before people like, Christopher Nolan were, or the Wachowskis sisters. They believe that what you see around you is Maya and illusion. It's none of it's real. It's how do you get past that to know the truth? And so Vishnu dreams the world. We live inside of it. And Vishnu is very interesting because he is said to show up in Hindu mythology in various guises or what we call avatars. So there are 10 that he inhabits in the mythology, some animal, the earliest avatars, and then later ones human. And again, this is how he appeared to people, right? Appeared to us mortals in order to guide the universe or nudge the universe in the ways that he may have wanted to nudge it. In each cycle, right, that he creates. So the gods here, you'll notice, do interfere with human matters. They often do interfere with human matters and interact with humans. So he appears as his avatar, right, his disguise, let us say, in order to interact with humans. So the art image you're seeing is him as the boar that saved the world. He's kind of shown as a hybrid here with a boar's head, right, and a humanish body, but you get the point. Now, one of the things I think is interesting is when Buddhism arises, later after Hinduism's foundation, the Hindus, if you think about it, they have to struggle with this idea of the Buddha who's saying a lot of things that are similar to them, but also was very interested in having no caste system, having equality. Buddha will have very different viewpoints from Hindu viewpoints. We'll get to those. But I think what's interesting is that the Hindus are well, Buddha was, an avatar of Vishnu. Problem solved, right? He's just an extension of our religion. You just don't even know it. It's a pretty easy save. I always laugh about it a little bit. And then Kalki is the avatar to come. And Kalki is thought to appear to us as a rider on a pale horse. So if you want to go and look at your comparative religions, you might say that sounds really kind of weirdly familiar. Because a lot of cultures have end of the world mythology about, how will things end? And again, for Hindus, we're living in a world age. We're living in a world age that will soon fail. Here he is again, right? Where Shiva will have to come and destroy it. So these world bubbles, these world time eggs, let us say, Vishnu creates the world, Shiva destroys the world. And we're just living in this cyclical sense of time, until the time is destroyed. And as I mentioned before, Shiva dances so hard that he creates this, circle of flame to burn the world with. He's stamping out ignorance, right? The dwarf below him, he's dancing and stamping out the ignorance of those who've forced him to come, kill the world, essentially. And I'd mentioned, look at multiple arms, right? Society of multiplicity shows up quite often in Hindu symbology and Hindu representation. But Shiva shows up to destroy the world. But I'd also mentioned that Shiva has other roles to play. Often the gods will not just have one guise. They'll often do a lot of different jobs. So one of Shiva's other jobs is the great meditator or the great ascetic. Because meditation obviously is very important to Hinduism. And then he's also the lord of procreation, is often represented as what we call a lingam or a penis. In the image on the left, he's shown as the lingam or the penis piercing the yoni or the vagina. And this was very typical in Hindu imagery. They believed in this idea of cosmic connection or cosmic unification between the male and the female. and they believe that very much it creates a balance in the universe. So this idea of lingam and yoni together, you see this in a lot of Shiva temples. And people who are hoping for fertility, they want to get pregnant, have babies, they often go to the Shiva temples, right, to worship the lingam, essentially, worship the procreative power of Lord Shiva. So again, Shiva had other roles to play than just, the Nataraja. Here is Shiva with his consort, Parvati. Consorts were like girlfriends, right? This is the person you were, in a sense, wedded to romantically in the Hindu canon. So Shiva's consort is Parvati, and you see them here united, basically in the most basic way you can be. And so I wanted to point out that, for Hindus, the masculine, feminine balance is very important. They look at sexuality as a very powerful thing, not something to be hidden away, but something that is symbolic. So they often put it out there in their art very boldly. And if you know about Ganesha, right, Shiva is the father of Ganesha. How did Ganesha get his elephant head? Well, Parvati and Ganesha were very close, and Shiva got a little jealous and killed him and chopped off his head. And then Parvati was so upset that she basically wouldn't stop crying. He's like, oh, fine. And he went and found the first animal he could, which was an elephant. He killed the elephant, took the head, brought it back, put it on Ganesha, reanimated him, and there you go. So Ganesha is sort of a minor god underneath Shiva and Parvati, but he actually has grown to be a very important god to a lot of Hindus. You see him in a lot of Hindu temples. If you've ever gone to like an Indian grocery store, you'll probably see Ganesha there. It's because he's the god of good luck and good fortune. So he's at weddings usually. He's often in businesses. So he's become quite widespread as far as usage in the Indian, right, mentality. So you see Ganesh or Ganesha right here in this image. And finally, the last part of the Trinity, which is what we call Durga Deve. You often will see the names alone. I put them here together. That way you're seeing both of them at the same time. And she's like the great mother in Hindu mythology. She's not seen as much in art and imagery. But again, this idea of motherhood, fertility, right, the feminine, it's a way of balancing that masculine, we'd say, within the pantheon of thought. And she does embody all things feminine. So we talk about how there's Durga Deve, who's like the graceful feminine, right? And then you can look at a god like Kali, which is the dark feminine, who is wearing, dismembered arms as a skirt and skulls as a necklace and holding the guy's head out and, drinking his blood and things like that. So the dark, destroyer. When I look at like Hinduism and I look at like, imagery in Mesoamerica and such, I always see that they're very, very okay and comfortable with this idea that everything has its opposite manifestation. So if you're going to have a good mom, you're going to have a bad mom too, You're going to have a welcoming, warm, feminine goddess. You're going to have a dark, destructive goddess as well. So they're always about the balance of these things together. As I mentioned, Hindus are very traditional people. Excuse me, where they use the caste system. I'll show you a slide on the caste system in a second. And then, Hinduism is about culture. It's about the culture you come from. So can you convert to Hinduism? No, not really. I'm from, Irish, Czechoslovakian background. My family was Methodist, I'm pretty white. I'm not Indian, I'm not from India. So they would say if I really wanted to be Hindu, I'd have to really think on that my whole life and then hope I was reincarnated, right, within Hinduism, and then I could be Hindu. And you might say, well, I know people who have become like, Hare Krishnas, things like that. That's different. But the idea of like traditional Hinduism, it really is about being Indian, being part of Indian culture. And being born into that system. So it's a very traditional religion. Most religions want to proselytize. They want to convert people. Hinduism's like, nope, it's about these people that live here. It's about being Indian. It's about our culture. And the caste system, what's the caste system? It is the classes of people. Now, India, about 20 years ago, I think it was now, outlawed the caste system. They said it was outmoded and outdated, but you find that most people still talk about caste if you talk to a traditional Hindu. because it's a system that allows them to understand where everybody goes, what purpose they serve. And you'll notice you have everything from the lowest people, the untouchables, the people that work with garbage and dead bodies, and you move up, right, to the layer of priests or the Brahmin. Notice Brahmin, Brahma. So for Hindus, they believe that you could only be reincarnated when you'd reached Brahmin caste. So throughout your reincarnations, right, let's say you started as a Shudra or a peasant, you would have to just keep doing good works in that caste, hoping you'd be reincarnated, let's say one step up, like a Vaishya, a merchant, and then so on and so forth. And then, as I mentioned, you had to do things based on your dharma or your caste or your station. So karmically, your actions had to actually equate to your caste. You couldn't overshoot your caste, let us say. I always joke that there's no 80s movies, like you're going to fall in love with somebody from the other side of the tracks things going on here. Like if you are a Brahmin caste, you're certainly not going to go marry that cute Shudra girl. Like, no. You married within your caste, you worked within your caste, and you hope to be reincarnated further up so you could reach Brahmin caste and then seek nirvana, right? Seek moksha, seek release. So it is a very traditional, very conservative, very rigid and ordered way of life. But when I've talked to Hindus about this, they say it gives everyone a purpose, it gives everyone a place. It makes things very simple to understand. We know who we should marry, we know what kind of jobs we should do, and we don't struggle, So where we might say, well, that you have no choices here, how can you live this way? When I've talked to most Hindus about this, starting back when I went to college and forward, because whenever I meet people from other cultures, I try to ask them, honestly, like about certain things how does this work, right? And whenever I talk to people who are Hindu, they typically say, I don't have a problem with caste because, again, it gives me a sense of purpose and place. I know where I am in the reincarnation cycle. I know who I should marry, who my children should marry after that. It's pretty easy. And again, these are people talking about their own ways of life. So I try to relate that, that if we're thinking, oh, wow, this seems really structured. Well, it is, but they like it. So it's a unique and different thought. And as I said, legally it's been outlawed, but most people still adhere, right, to its practice. And often if you wonder why Indians do certain jobs like, own stores, well, there's a whole caste based on owning stores, being merchants, right? So if you're a Vaishya class, then that's what you do for a living. So it makes perfect sense to me at the end of the day. Final thing I'm going to show you is temple building, and speak a little bit about Tantra here at the end just because it's fun. And temple building, the idea of temple building is part of their puja or their worship. Right? We talked a little bit about darsana, using art to worship, puja, worship in general. And I'm going to show you the rathas at Mamallapuram first. And if you have trouble saying these Indian names, don't worry, it's still hard for me. So the rathas at Mamallapuram. And a ratha is a small temple like you're seeing here. You'll notice it's a very small temple, really probably only 1 or 2 people could go inside of it. And I'll show you a more large-scale temple here in a minute. So these are rathas, or these little small temples. And we're looking at a group of them here at Mamallapuram that show you a lot of different building styles, and then also there's a lot of carvings on site of different animals that represent different gods and different avatars and different kinds of things. One thing I'll mention with the architecture is notice how there's kind of this terraced kind of appearance or layer cake kind of appearance to the way they do a lot of the roofing here. That's a very Indian style that you often see in this type of architecture. And one really cool thing about these rathas is they were carved out of blocks or boulders of sandstone that were actually at the site or actually present at the site. So they used the sandstone boulders to carve the rathas and to also carve the different types of narrative sequences that you see around on the grounds as well. So this is probably the most famous narrative sequence that you see here. And it's from the Mahabharata, which is a very famous tale from Indian lore. And it deals with the penance of Arjuna or the descent of the Ganges. So again, they would carve these narrative pieces right into the sandstones. I told you that you see some animal imagery here related to the gods. This is Nandi. who was the sacred bull of Shiva. You see that just like with the Egyptian gods, they often were shown as hybrids. Like on the right, he's shown with like the body of a man, but the head of the bull. And then on the left, he's just shown as a bull. So Egyptians also did this with their hybrid gods as well. So just a connection there to that practice. Here's a nice close-up of Nandi, right, carved out of the sandstone. And a lot of the gods had their consorts, and then they also had a sacred animal that was related to them. So that's, very, very typical. Another place to look at temples that I think is really cool is Khajuraho. And you'll notice this is a much more large-scale temple than the Rathas that you saw. And once again, notice that kind of layer cake, kind of look to it. You get these very vertical, conical tower structures with Hindu temples. This is a very typical look that you see. And on Khajuraho's temples are these tantric carvings that basically depict all kinds of wild manner, right, of sexuality and sexual positions and such. And we might be like, oh my God, like what am I seeing, right? But this is the influence of tantric practice being shown. As I mentioned, Hindus don't have a problem with open sexuality. They actually look at the male-female connection as a balance of energy, or a balance of, influence, basically. And again, though, you see this channeled into what we call tantric practice. If you've ever seen the text of the Kama Sutra, it's basically about like how to use sexual energy, right, as a purposeful thing. And they look at like orgasm as a window into moksha or a window into nirvana. They view sexual energy as something very potent and very powerful. So as you walk around at this temple complex, you see all of these sort of wild sexual carvings that to the Western eye, we might be like, oh my, and kind of view them pornographically. But to Hindus, they'd say, well, this is how people unite. This is sexuality. This is what bears children. This is the balance of energy between masculine and feminine. So why would we not show you these things? Why would we think it's bad? They're definitely not prudish, right, about sexuality in any way, which I find a lot of Western religions are. So again, I like showing you Tantra just to give you a little shake, because you probably have grown up with a lot of Western imagery of religious context. And again, you don't see this kind of stuff in Western religious imagery. So I think it's sort of a fun place to end. Next video, where we'll be talking about Buddhism. And I'll be talking a little bit about the similarities and differences there from Hindu practice.